So the next step then is something that's really, so this is the part that we still have just in the development team, but that's really more for an infrastructure reason, I'd say, because if everybody's going to merge things into releases and release branches, things might go a little out of control just because there's too many cooks do something, right? So the merging part is where it needs to be decided what version something's going to go into. In most cases, it's really obvious. So bug fixes always go into the current stable version, unless there are problems in a particular development environment, right? For new features, again, it's relatively simple. It's going to go into the next feature release. There's a few points where there's like open discussion because it's nearly time for a feature freeze for the current next release, and you could also put it into the one afterwards. So that's the only case where any decision has to really be made in here. Again, merging is something that has made our development process a lot easier for the developers, because merging with Git is what I'm trying to say, because Git allows us to more easily apply the same changes to different versions and to handle multiple revisions or versions at the same time. And this is what makes our new development strategy possible, where we want to work on multiple versions at the same time. Where we have a stable version where we're working on the feature release, and at the same time we're working on a new rewrite, phpBB4, which we're going to hear a little more about. And Git is really enabling us to follow that kind of a model, rather than previously with Subversion, where it was really difficult to do anything other than work on one version at a time. And we would have one stable version, and at some point we decide, okay, now we've got to develop the next version. And basically, the stable version would be like security fix. It's difficult to really keep maintaining the old version and keep track of all those bugs in the other version, because merging is just so much more difficult. And then we come to the final part. So your idea has actually been gone into the tracker, it's gone through a discussion process, somebody's written a patch for it, the patch has been merged into the actual repository. And now there's going to be a release. So I mentioned one thing before, we do feature freezes now. The idea behind that is that we have a much shorter development cycle. If we pick a particular date where features have to be finished, rather than deciding on a set of features that we want to have in the next version. So that way, the number of features in the next version might be a little low, but we can be relatively certain that the next version is going to be finished in time, right? So we're going to see a few phpBB 3.x releases, which might not have all that many changes, but they're going to have a few really useful ones, and they're going to be released comparatively quickly if you look at past releases. So there's not going to be another 5-year break between 3.x releases. It's already taken nearly 3 years, but that is because for the first 2 years, we essentially ended up doing the same mistake we did with version 3. Well, we were trying to build a new version of phpBB 3.2 that had so many planned changes that it was about to turn into an entire rewrite. And we decided to just scrap that and start over, and rather have the entire rewrite phpBB4 and have these small changes in the version 3. So we decided not to change any of the underlying system, but rather build on top of what we have, and really restrict us from making those intrusive changes that require changes to everything else as a effect. So yeah, once we've got the release point is reached, so of course we've got the beta, RC releases, etc. Quality control kind of comes in, and the release is tested by our QA team as well as users, depending on which version it is. Users do test more or less. For these small minor releases, a lot of users don't test them particularly much. And again, the tracker is used to keep track of what fixes have been verified by QA, right? So if you've reported this idea in the very beginning, now is the time to see if the release does exactly what you were hoping for, what you thought should be changed. And you can give feedback again on the tracker and like keep track of this thing. And of course, if something went wrong, it's not quite what you wanted, and there's a problem, you're going to have to reopen it, and we're going to do the same thing all over for the next version, right? So now we're going to go into some of the details. So Chris is going to join me and talk about the next feature release, which is 3.1 Ascreaus, and he's going to explain the features there. This for the next one.
Cheers. Okay, so in the next release, 3.1, we have a number of changes planned. As you can see, I've outlined the changes for developers. The biggest change will be the new coding standards, which, to summarise, classes will be prefixed with phpBB, so we get a namespace and we're not conflicting with other projects. For example, our user class conflicts with Drupal. Eval will not be used or permitted anywhere. This includes preg callbacks, the /e modifier. New lines at the end of files, that's something we've removed before, but we will be leaving in. And on top of that, the closing PHP tag we'll be removing that as well, as they're not required in solely PHP files. And arrays will have a trailing comma at the end. We've been a bit mixed on how we treat this, so we've decided to enforce it. So it makes it easier if you're just appending something to the end of an array. You don't have to add an extra comma which modifies the line above. Right, hooks. Henry's going to discuss a bit more later. There's a new RFC forum for hooks on Area 51. Basically, the whole idea is that mods will be less invasive. New BB code engine, which is going to be stack-based, as opposed to being a series of regular expressions matching. Essentially, all our core BB codes will actually be custom BB codes, so you can remove them, modify them, add your own BB codes that are just as powerful as the core ones with ease. And the new template engine, which is pulled over from the old 3.2, is essentially implemented as a PHP stream filter, which means that the memory consumption overall to actually compile a template is significantly reduced. So we get a slight performance increase compiling the actual template code, and there's also some small optimizations to the compiled code, so it does run slightly faster when it's actually run. The next major change is the request class, which Nils has been working on, and basically that will replace request var. So instead of using request var to request a external user parameter, either from post or get or cookie, you use the request class, and as part of that infrastructure it will overwrite when in common it overwrites the post get cookie variable global super globals, which prevent you from actually accessing those that are unfiltered, so mods are enforced not to access those. So it makes the mod team's validation process a lot easier, because if they don't have to keep telling people, you can't do this, it's unsecure, they just won't be able to do it. Compatibility, where that is concerned, is there's a mode to actually disable it. So if you're wrapping phpBB inside something else, you can selectively disable it at the end, so you restore the original global super globals. cron, that's a very good example. Basically, currently we have a rather static, rigidly defined cron system. In 3.1, it will be extendable by mod authors and also site administrators with a bit of code. So they can add new tasks, and it's definitely worth mentioning that this is entirely community developed at the minute. No developers actually worked on it so far. We've all read over it mostly, but we haven't actually written any code for it.
It's a bit slow, just wait, like once and then wait.
Okay. So we have a number of changes for administrators as well. We're going to add the SQLite 3 database management system. So that will be an extra layer that you can use because SQLite 2 is essentially deprecated now. It wasn't an option to support it in PHP 4, but now we've dropped that support for PHP 4, we can actually implement it. We're going to be adding the mod installer to the core, AutoMod, which is Josh's domain. He'll be talking about that later. The team page, currently that's statically coded so that it lists your administrators and your moderators, and that's it. It will be replaced with something that's configurable by the administrator, so you can display user groups that you think are appropriate to be displayed on that page. So you can add as many user groups or remove as many user groups as you want. Another highlight would be user pruning, which is something we've taken a bit of criticism for, especially where spam bots are involved and whatnot. It's quite hard to actually prune large chunks of users out. There's very little selection criteria currently, so we'll be expanding that with additional criteria and whatever else people suggest, I guess. Right, and there's some final additions for end users. Gravatars. So instead of uploading your own avatar or linking to your own avatar like you would normally in phpBB, you can use your gravatar. Good bonus of this is, of course, the administrator's not serving it from their server. They're also moderated, so you can select a specific level of decency you want to accept on your board. Another improvement will be soft delete, which at the moment, if you want to implement something like soft delete on your forum, it's got to be completely policy based, so you have to get your moderators to actually move a topic to a trash can forum. Instead, we'll actually be implementing this in code, so they delete a topic, it doesn't actually get removed entirely, it's purely gone for as far as any normal user is concerned.